Hello, everyone, and welcome to another session of Star Trek Adventures Captain's Log. This will be the beginning of our third mission, entitled, at least preemptively, Belly of the Beast, Part 1. Now, I anticipate this being potentially a shorter session, shorter mission than previous ones, although I have absolutely no idea. I will, real quick, before we dive into the actual play, I'm going to go over what I rolled for everything and rough thoughts of where it took my brain and where I expect the story might go. For the mission type, we're dealing with a near-space exploration, and I rolled the subtype of Alien Probe Enters Federation Space. Obviously, this takes the mind to Star Trek 4, so I'm trying to lean away from that line of thinking. I don't need to rehash the whale probe. Certainly couldn't do it any better. Our incident, I rolled a rescue. Theme, and this is where it got interesting. I rolled, I believe it was a 19 on this, so I had to roll on the theme twice. And I rolled living ship and temporal anomaly. I think you can probably see where that took my head to begin with. Advantage or complication, this is the first mission that I've rolled an advantage. The previous two had been a complication. We're going to have a chance encounter at some point with a specialist delivered by shuttlecraft whose expertise is needed for the mission, which I think should be quite interesting. And lastly, our encounters. Again, I think I got somewhat lucky with this. We rolled an abandoned place and its life support failure on a derelict spacecraft. I'm just going to roll that into everything else that I already rolled, and we're going to start out essentially with the Jemison approaching the system of question. So, let's go ahead and dive right in to this week's mission. Once again, a little bit of housekeeping before we get started. I will be releasing Friday, Saturday, Sunday this week. This video should come out on Friday. That seems to be a much better pace. As far as whether or not I will be keeping to a once every week release schedule, I'm not entirely positive on that yet. I think I'll be able to do both this week and next week on the same schedule, but as to whether or not things will shift after that, once I've got 4 weeks worth in, I'll reevaluate and see how time goes. I also just want to preface this by saying that there are many different ways to run Star Trek Adventures Captain's Log. I know there are plenty of people who run longer form missions where they stop to write and take notes and have a lot more detailed missions. But I'm choosing to run this. I've got a busy schedule, and I'm with running other games and work life and various writing. I'm choosing to run a more short form, which definitely works better for me at this point in time. So again, if you want to see something with a little more detail in it, you should probably buy a copy of this yourself and run for yourself. Honestly, it takes very little effort to play through. So let's go ahead and get started. First Officer's Log, Stardate 2188.3. As luck would have it, we've been pulled from our current assignment studying the Beta Corealis system to intercept an entity that has suddenly appeared on Federation long-range sensors. At the moment, the entity is just sitting there, but for what purpose we can only guess. Here's where things get interesting. Starfleet sent a probe ahead of us. The probe scans couldn't penetrate the entity's outer shell, but what it did detect was an extraordinary quantity of chronitons. The Jemison will be dropping out of warp shortly, and I anticipate an interesting mission. And so that's where we start. We're going to open, first off, with a glamour shot of the Jemison flying through space, flying through warp speed. And maybe we cut to a scene in one of the office spaces. We know they've got meeting rooms with those lovely three-sided screens. So maybe we cut there and have a quick scene with the Jemison crew, Captain Malik, the chief engineer, helm officer, science officer, chief medical officer, and tactical. All of our bridge crew, so to speak, present, as well as, of course, Commander Sarah Paulsen. So we cut to that table. Maybe we see Lieutenant DeWitt standing up and gesturing at a chart he's brought in, or is displaying on a... I don't recall in the original series, at least, if they have monitors on the back wall as well, but I'm going to assume that they do. So we've got Lieutenant DeWitt gesturing at a thing on a monitor, pointing out what he's describing to be... let's see. Is he aware of the fact that this is a living ship, a living creature that has just suddenly appeared on Federation long-range sensors, or is he still under the impression that it's a ship? Let's do the yes or no probability matrix. I think it's 50-50. I see no reason not to do it 50-50. So yes, he knows it's a ship. No, he does not. Yes, he believes it, or excuse me. Yes, he knows it's alive. No, or suspects it's alive. And I did roll a 9, so he suspects it's living. So he's pointing out various features that he's taking as proof that this ship, which for all intents and purposes seems to be made of like, we'll call it like a volcanic glass. It's kind of got this black reflective surface that looks a little bit like volcanic glass. But there are other features that he would call maybe something like flagella, that he believes prove that this thing is a living creature, or at least embodies aspects of living creatures. Captain Malik would then say, alright, does anyone have any suggestions as we push forward into the system here? I'll take suggestions before I decide who's on our away team. The whole crew is kind of silent for a minute before DeWitt suggests, well, Captain, I think it'd be a good idea to have either myself or Commander Waring go on the landing party. Well, I'm not entirely convinced that this thing is alive, but just in case. Who is he going to send? Again, 1 to a 10, it's DeWitt. 11 to 20, it's Dr. Waring. That's a 20. Dr. Waring will be going with us. Shortly thereafter, he announces that Commander Paulsen will be going, as well as, let's see, 2 security officers. He's going to keep Petty Officer Bassett on the bridge for this mission, just in case this thing decides to do something more than just sit there. So we're going to have 2... shall we say, junior Starfleet's security officers. And real quick, I'm going to pause this while I generate some names for them. The landing team will be joined by, I guess rank petty officer would match here as well. I don't know my enlisted rankings well enough, but by Harlan Konachek, Mr. Konachek, and Mr. Ethan Voigt will be joining the away team as backup security. So we then see the ship drop out of warp, and we get our first good actual, cinematic shot of whatever this entity is. And I think it definitely looks like I said, like volcanic glass. The flagella that the probe had picked up have been slightly retracted, like it's pulled them back into somewhere. And we would see no sign of any engine, so to speak. No sign of, honestly, anything out of the ordinary other than by nature of its construction. So the Jemison will approach. We're going to have, I guess our first task be the beaming aboard of the landing party. And once again, just like in our last mission, they are wearing EV suits that kind of, again, I don't know that I'm necessarily strictly original series. I might be going more Strange New Worlds with this. So their EV suits might not be ridiculous in their design. see. I don't remember what the EV suits look like in Strange New Worlds. I think they're very much more that sleek style that we see in Discovery. Yeah, and we see them a little bit elsewhere, but that's beside the point. So we're going to do our first task here and have Chief Engineer Diana Reardon beam the away team aboard this entity. Scans are having a difficult time penetrating the hull of the ship, so she is not entirely sure that she's going to be able to get the entire team aboard either in one go or to the same place, which would be very interesting. Would remind me of the scene in the 2009 Star Trek where Scotty ends up in the water system, whatever that was. So let's go ahead and have her roll. I don't have her stats in front of me, but again, I believe she's an 11 and a 4, so that'd be a 15. I think that tracks. And given the nature of this scan, I'm imposing on myself a threat, so to speak, a complication, in that the thing, or the transport is going to be difficult. It is going to be a succeeds at a cost, however. So if we fail, it'll be something like I described. That is unfortunate. That is one success, but not the two that we needed. Rolled a 15 and a 16. Yeah, that's a 16. Thought it was an 18 for a second. So she starts to beam the away team over. We're going to mark one failure on here. That's exciting. Actually, we're not going to mark anything because it's a failure. And let's see how this gets split up. First off, is Commander Paulsen alone, or does she end up with someone else? Again, I say 50-50. She ends up with another person. Is she going to end up with a security officer or with Dr. Waring? Because I think we're going to split it at this point 50-50. So, actually, is it 50-50? I give it a 50-50 shot that it's 50-50. 1 to 10, it's 50-50. It is not 50-50. So she is in the group of 3. Who is the odd person out between the 3 that are left? This could be interesting. Let's go ahead and make Dr. Waring have a slightly higher chance to be the odd one out. So let's say that it's probably Dr. Waring, 1 to 15. A 2. So Dr. Waring does not arrive in the same place as them after the transport has gone through. They materialize inside this this large kind of circular chamber that does not move in a straight path. It's kind of winds around, and Commander Paulsen, kind of thinking about living creatures, would suggest that maybe these are something like blood vessels. And the size of this thing, for reference scale, I think it's rather large, maybe comparable in size to the Enterprise. So you could consider that a creature that large might have blood vessels, or arteries at the very least, large enough for a person to walk through. All right, so the walls, however, as they kind of reach out and touch them, are not squishy. They are firm. They resemble something more akin to rock or even metal than they do something biological. All right, fantastic. Commander Paulsen and Mr. Konachek and Mr. Voigt have transported in, and the Doctor is missing. I believe then our next task is going to be a search for the Doctor. Let's see. I don't know the answer to this question, but the question comes up: will communicators work at short range within the outer shell of this living ship? I think it's probably somewhat improbable for the Federation, the Starfleet communicators to work, but we'll see. Yes, they work is a 1 to a 7. 17, communications do not work. Fantastic. Okay, so now we need to do an old-fashioned search. And Commander Paulsen is not necessarily the best at this. But she does have a focus in xenobiology. And I think here we could use her reason science isn't bad. That'd be a 12. I don't think there's any justification for using either control or presence. So I think reason makes the most sense. And I think science works. If she's trying to figure out, okay, if we're here and Dr. Waring should be close to us, where do we have to go? Yeah, I think that makes sense. Trying to navigate through this living creature. So we're looking for a 12, and anything 3 or under is a critical success with her focus in xenobiology. That is, in fact, a 5 and an 8. So 2 successes. We do generate a momentum. Once again, using my Viking coin as a momentum marker. And we can mark off our second task. First task was a failure. Second task is a success. Alrighty. Let's see. Trying to see if any of her values are going to be of use here in this mission. Home has a pair of nacelles. That could come into play. I'm going to try and keep that in mind. And I don't know, the diversity one might work, and I definitely think there's something new around every star cluster would work. So we'll keep in mind the home has a pair of nacelles and the something new around every star cluster. I don't think they're going to come into play quite yet, but we'll see. All right, and I think it's fair to note as well that they've had emergency beacons put into their EV suits, and I think this is a reasonable guess. It's sending out a stronger signal than the communicators can, and for the sake of this, just a little bit of a retcon. Before they beamed over, they were told that they would be beamed back in half an hour if they weren't heard from by the Jemison crew. So they're not particularly concerned. As long as nothing crazy happens in the next half hour, they're going to manage to get out of there. So with our success here, I think we can say it's only about maybe 10 minutes before Commander Paulsen leads the 2 security officers through the various corridors of this living ship and finds Dr. Waring about where she expected to. The Doctor, of course, using the first rule of survival in the wilderness. When you get lost, pick a point and stay there. Now, whether or not that's an actual rules of survival, I don't know. I'm not well versed. But it seems reasonable to me that Dr. Waring would just wait for somebody to come and find her if she's not in any danger. In the meantime, I think Dr. Waring would have been making scans of the corridor she arrived in with her tricorder. So let's go ahead and have her do a... this would be a reason medicine test, I would say. And I think she's probably got a 10 reason and a 5 medicine, so we're looking at a 15. She just wants to try and determine anything that she can about this creature. A 15, I say. Well, I'm going to use my momentum. I rolled an 18 and an 18. I apparently am liking high numbers today. So we're going to reroll one of these d20s and hope for something less than a 15. A 2, that will do it. And because I don't have her written down, she doesn't get a focus. She's not the main character. But that is a success, so we can mark that off. As the rest of the away team joins Dr. Waring, she would say, yes, glad you managed to find me, Commander. This is certainly... I have confirmation that this was at one point a living creature. It does not seem to be living currently, although there are signs that some lower functions are still, shall we say, active. But it does not exhibit the primary features we would expect of a living creature. There's no limbic system, no vascular system. As far as I can tell, no nervous system, but I haven't been able to penetrate the corridor walls here, which, as I'm guessing you have surmised, are some sort of blood vessel or artery. As for the flagella that we saw from the exterior, that's the one feature that seems to indicate a sign of activity still. It also wouldn't be a terrible surprise if this creature, or rather what this creature was, had its nervous system designed in such a way that it regulates and acts very much as our duotronic system does now. Our EPS grid. And Commander Paulsen, I believe, would be, taking all of this in, and would put the question to the Doctor whether or not this ship was designed for other living creatures to use as a ship, or if other living creatures have used it as a ship because it happened to be convenient. And I don't think Dr. Waring would have the answer to that question yet. Interestingly enough, they're not getting any sign of chroniton particles inside the ship either, which would be a point of concern for Commander Paulsen. To this point, they've got about 15 minutes until their beam out. I think they're going to make their way... I think they're going to try and find the bridge. Assuming that there is one. And that actually brings up a question. I think it's probable that there's a bridge. So we'll say a 1 to a 15. Pull that dice off the table. 13, there is in fact a bridge. Now let's see if Commander Paulsen can lead the group to one. I think here, Insight Con could work well. It's about ship identification, but it's also based on other factors therein. So Insight Con, we're looking for a 12. Let's see what we get. Once again, I changed dice after the last one too, as you may recall. I switched from my yellow dice to my red dice, and I just rolled a 1 and a 20. So I get both 2 successes, a momentum, and a threat from the 20, which is just dandy. Okay, that's fascinating to parrot a certain Vulcan. We do, however, have our 4th task completed. They managed to find their way to the bridge. They don't see the bridge itself. First off, there are no doors. What they find instead are kind of viscous membranes. It's the only sign of anything that's very clearly still biological in nature. But they kind of arrive at this viscous membrane and can see through it to a certain extent, and see beyond what looks like something that could be conceived of as a bridge. First off, there's a viewport in the front, and what seem to be a number of various stations is the best way to put it. But we as the viewer would see them more as like, what's a good word for it? They'd be like little stalks coming out of the deck of the bridge, kind of just standing up and curved in kind of a slight manner. They're certainly smaller than Starfleet consoles. They don't seem to have any sort of buttons. But the first person that we see pass through the barrier, this viscous membrane, would be Commander Paulsen. I think that's her daring coming into play. She's a little more daring than the average person. But she pushes through that viscous membrane, and we would see, again, like I said a moment ago, we would see her approaching all of these various stalks coming out of the deck, and would kind of reach out and touch them and get a feel for them. Once again, they are not soft like the viscous membrane is, more like the blood vessels, the arteries that they'd been walking through previously. And as she touches them, they don't do anything. So once again, I think we're going to have our 5th task here, which will take place shortly before the beam out, as they're now approaching that point in time. And this will be a nice spot to have, shall we say, I think I know what's going to happen. We'll put it that way. So she's going to go ahead and attempt a... I think she's going to just try and brute force this. She's going to do like a... There are various features across the stalk. It's not like it's smooth. So I think she's going to try various patterns of inputting things, tapping things on this stalk. So I think that gives me a justification for using control and science. And I'm not going to use my threat quite yet. I have an idea of where this is going, and the threat, I think, will complicate that more than I would like. So we're going to go ahead and roll our 13 control science and see what we can get. Okay, that is a 2 on one die and an 18 on the other. None of her foci come into play here. So that is a success, however, and we are good. And what we would see is, as she taps at one of these stalks, she hits kind of a weird nodule on one, and all of a sudden, projected in front of her, like a flat screen, we see a visualization of data. And as she starts to read it, she very quickly realizes and starts to say out loud, "This is in Federation Standard." And that's when the transporter kicks back in, and all 4 of the landing party are beamed back to the Jemison. And this would be an excellent spot for us to cut into the second act, as we have learned that whatever the ship is, the people who had been using it speak and or read Federation Standard. So that's going to do it for this first part of what am I calling it? Belly of the Beast Part 1. We will resume in the next part with our second act. We will likely have our specialist delivered by shuttlecraft to try and determine exactly what's going on with this living creature. I hope you all enjoyed this first part. If you want to make sure that you don't miss out on parts 2 or 3, or any of the future Captain's Log missions that I run through, make sure to subscribe to the channel. Every little bit helps. Every bit of feedback I get and all the likes and views definitely encourage me to keep going with this. So if you want to see more, putting a like, adding a comment, subscribing, all of that stuff is fantastic. So thanks once again. Live long and prosper, and I will see you next time.